and fraud with worries leaking out find their families. Atlanta continues to own that lot of sense of glance here in the fourth quarter. Great board just could not convert. It was push go to the who just enough to not have a greater. You go to we go 74 right now. You started out with the Seminoles run. How did he kind of thing going for your dream, the Amazon? I like shit beginning, but it's actually Indiana that is 7 points off of that. Turnovers that Atlanta has granted until we saw Angel Graham production, and Angel reached out to our going to don't read in particular energy shit that I thought where she got some up. Actually Indiana that is 7 points off of the turnovers that Atlanta has granted until we saw Angel Graham production, and Angel reached out to our to make to don't read in particular energy ship that I thought when she got some of those easy baskets to go in. The bank that quite frankly she had struggled with the open the ball game. That's when you start this deep, begin to pick up his energy. This dreams where to begin to play with the more confident. Athletes know it's not how you start, it's how you finish is contagious, because if you look at Angel Reese, she already has 7 and 9. She's already getting close to a double-double. But then also if you think about, on the other side of you're seeing the Indiana Fever, they're just being a little bit methodical as well, because I like these goods. A great place you see Caitlin Orcas rating. It's like both sides are leaning into their strength on this. And let's go back to the Angel really quickly though, or that the catalyst that you saw to be able to change things around. And she said to Holly, I just feel like I needed to take a deep breath and maybe stop overthinking some of the on them, and why we need to have a very serious and very honest conversation about what Angel Reese produced during the Indiana Fever versus Atlanta Dream game, because the on-court execution was not the story the ESPN studio told at halftime, and the gap between what the broadcast commentary celebrated and what the footage actually documented represents exactly the kind of accountability failure that prevents players from improving and prevents fans from receive any accurate analysis of what they are watching. Broad range of raising out on a bridge. Receive better. She's gay. She's a diva. Oh my God, age always let us establish the documented facts of Reese's performance before anything else enters this conversation, because the numbers are the foundation, and the foundation cannot be adjusted to accommodate comfortable narratives. Angel Reese finished the game with 15 points, 5 for 16 from the field, 4 turnovers and 14 rebounds. The double-double was recorded. The rebounding hustle that generates those second chance opportunities was present as it consistently as for Reese. Those are the things she can do and does consistently, but 5 of 16 from the field is not a performance that warrants celebration regardless of the rebounding numbers surrounding it, and 4 turnovers in a game where Atlanta needed every possession to compete against Indiana further undermines the statistical framing that the broadcast chose to emphasize. That halftime the specific miss led up at the end of the game when Reese had a wide open opportunity that would have been a game winning or game 2. Time play is the moment that crystallizes what the footage consistently shows across this season, and going back through multiple seasons of watching her compete at this level, there was nobody else in the frame not contesting defender arriving at full speed, not an elite shot blocker position to alter the attempt. She was alone with layup and she missed it. That is not a difficult competitive situation producing an understandable miss. That is a fundamental basketball skill executed below the professional standard at the most critical moment of a competitive game. The earlier missed layups throughout this game followed the same pattern, multiple documented occasions of Reese operating in isolation near the basket with minimal or zero defensive resistance and being unable to convert close-range attempts that professional basketball players are expected to make automatically regardless of game situation or competitive context. Mikhail attempts in and money buildings were both involved in defensive sequences against Reese that produced blocked or contested attempts, which is noteworthy for a player of Reese's size and physical profile. Now let us talk about what ESPN studio coverage chose to emphasize at halftime, because this is a direct and significant accountability issue that the basketball community is raising with increasing urgency at halftime of this guy. Game with Reese having shot somewhere between 2 for 9 and 3 for 10 from the field and already having missed multiple close-range opportunities. The ESPN studio crew spent approximately 10 minutes producing commentary that celebrated and praised her performance. Reese herself acknowledged in a direct post-game quote that she was playing poorly, using frank language about the quality of her own performance that stood in stark contrast to the studio coverage that had just spent halftime characterizing her game favorably. When a player acknowledges in her own words that she was playing at a substandard level, in the broadcast commentary covering that same game spent its halftime coverage in celebration of her performance, the disconnect is not a matter of subjective interpretation or differing analytical frameworks. It is a documented gap between what was happening on the court and what the broadcast chose to tell its audience. That gap has consequences. Players who receive praise for performances they themselves acknowledge were poor do not receive the honest feedback that would motivate and guide genuine improvement. Audiences who receive celebration instead of analysis lose trust in the commentary. They are consuming the broader pattern that observers have been documenting around Reese across now 3 seasons of professional play is the absence of genuine improvement in the areas that limit her competitive ceiling, most significantly the finishing around the basket is not shown the development trajectory that a player at her age and experience level should be demonstrating after 3 years of professional competition. The mid-range shot has not developed into a reliable offensive weapon. The three-point attempt remains essentially absent from her competitive game as a credible threat. The ball handling that would allow her to create her own offense in situations where the post feed is not available has not shown significant expansion. What has remained consistent and what genuinely deserves credit is the rebounding. Reese is a legitimate rebounder at the professional level who creates second-chance opportunities through physical engagement and positioning that is a real skill that contributes to competitive basketball. It is also not sufficient to make her a complete offensive player or to justify the kind of broadcast coverage that glosses over a 5 for 16 shooting performance with halftime celebrations. The upcoming FIBA World Cup context adds another dimension to this conversation that the broadcast coverage did not adequately address. Reese scheduled to represent the United States at an international competition in less than a month. When a player cannot reliably convert a wide-open fundamental layup in a WNBA regular season game, questions about the player's readiness to represent the country in international competition are not unfair or unreasonable. They are the natural analytical questions that professional basketball evaluation requires at the international level. The offensive athleticism and length that opponents bring to close-range situations is typically higher than what WNBA regular season competition provides. If the finishing that is already inconsistent against WNBA competition becomes even less reliable against international-level defenders, the limitation becomes a more significant competitive liability. In exactly the moments when the collective performance of the team matters most, the ESPN coverage at halftime chose not to engage with any of this. Instead, it spent 10 minutes on commentary that the player being discussed contradicted in her own post-game assessment. That is a choice with analytical and to the gentle implications that the basketball community is correct to examine critically. Monica make not specific commentary during the halftime segment has generated significant criticism from observers who have been tracking the pattern of how WNBA coverage handles players whose performance and whose cultural significance exists complex relationship with each other. The specific concern being raised is that the commentary consistently prioritizes a favorable framing over an accurate one when certain players are involved, and that this consistent prioritization has consequences for the players themselves who do not receive the honest analytical feedback that could contribute to their development. When a broadcast crew constructs 10 minutes of halftime praise around a player who is shooting between 2 for 9 and 3 for 10 from the field and has already been directly observed missing multiple uncontested close-range attempts, the fundamental question being raised is not whether the commentators like or dislike the player. The question is whether the commentary reflects what is actually happening on the basketball court, or whether it reflects other priorities that have displaced accurate analysis. That is a legitimate question about broadcast journalism and its obligations to the audience. That the commentary is supposed to serve the layup attempts that were missed throughout this game represent the most foundational and documented evidence of the execution gap in Reese's game that the broadcast chose not to address. There is no contested half-court shot. In the collection of missed attempts, there is no moment where she was facing elite defensive resistance in an impossible position that would contextualize the misses as understandable against superior competition. There are repeated sequences of Reese in or near the lane with minimal defensive presence, failing to convert the close-range opportunities that her rebounding positions her to receive in a game that went to overtime. Those missed conversions had direct competitive consequences for the Atlanta Dream. Every possession where an offensive player has the opportunity near the basket and cannot convert it is a possession that requires the team to either generate another scoring opportunity or surrender defensive position. Without scoring, multiple such failures across a game do not remain statistically isolated. They accumulate into competitive margin that separates teams that win from teams that need overtime or lose outright. The accountability conversation around this performance is not about criticism for its own sake. It is about the honest assessment that every professional athlete deserves from the media coverage surrounding their sport. When players read or watch coverage of their own performances, the accuracy of that coverage is one of the tools available for self-assessment and improvement. A player who watches halftime coverage celebrating at 2 for 9 first half does not receive the signal that something needs to change in her approach or her preparation. She receives the signal that what she is doing is acceptable. Reese's own honesty about her performance in the post-game comments, where she acknowledged directly that she was not playing well, suggests that she has internal awareness that the broadcast coverage did not reflect. That internal awareness is the foundation for improvement, but it cannot do the full work arc of development without the external validation from competitive performance that would come from converting the close-range opportunities she creates through her rebounding. The conclusion that emerges from looking at the footage and the box score and the broadcast coverage together is not complicated. Angel Reese had a poor offensive performance in this game. 5 for 16 from the field, missed close-range opportunities that Michaela Timpson and Money Billings contested or affected, and a missed game-winning layup attempt with nobody else in the frame. She acknowledged this herself in the clearest possible terms. The broadcast coverage at halftime told a different story and spent 10 minutes celebrating a performance that the player herself would not celebrate. The gap between the commentary and the competition is the accountability failure that requires honest examination, not because any individual player deserves unnecessary criticism, but because the audience of a professional sports broadcast deserves accurate analysis of what they are watching, and players competing at the highest level deserve commentary that reflects the genuine standards of professional basketball rather than the comfortable narratives that prioritize other considerations over truthful assessment. 3 years of professional competition, the same finishing limitations, the same mid-range absence, the same three-point non-threat, the same rebounding strength that produced the double-double numbers that the box score shows, and a halftime coverage that spent 10 minutes celebrating it while the game was still happening. The B.